Welcome back to the Sound of Loneliness podcast. We hope you are inspired by the voices of grit and grace that we share in these episodes. A reminder to like, follow, and subscribe to the Sound of Loneliness podcast wherever you listen, and to our YouTube channel. And if you like what you hear, please give us a 5-star rating. Then we can keep offering you more of what you'd like to listen to. Before we begin, we'd like to remind everyone that this podcast is separate from our clinical work at Valley Connections Counselling. The contents of this podcast should not be used as a replacement to accessing personalized mental health help or support. Today's episode is called Secure in Love. Good afternoon, Kiara. I guess it's afternoon for us.
It is. It's a weirdly snowy afternoon. We're being hit by a weird end of March snowstorm.
Wouldn't be Ontario without that, would it?
Exactly.
Yeah. So we are going to talk about relationships again today. And I think it's probably important for us to note that we are talking about relationships, mostly romantic relationship type of ideas today. And a lot of what we say would not apply to cases where people are in an abusive relationship.
Yeah, I think that's an important disclaimer.
Yeah. So our podcast today is called Secure in Love. And we might want to start by talking about what do we mean by this concept. So we often talk about attachment and attachment styles. Obviously, secure attachment is what everybody aspires to. I've since learned that we can have like an earned secure attachment. Have you heard of that?
I have, yeah.
Yes. So we might have had some, challenges early in our life that contributed to us developing and maintaining an insecure attachment style. So like an avoidant or an anxious or a disorganized attachment style. And sometimes when we do our work, we can move further and further toward having a secure attachment style. And then we earned it.
Which feels very exciting to think that if you do fall into the insecure attachment category, hope is not lost. There's
right.
so much room for growth. There's so much potential. And a reminder that about 50% of the population falls somewhere in the insecure attachment category. So it's not bad. It's not pathological. A lot of us fall somewhere in there. And we also can do something about it, which is so exciting.
Yeah, it is. I think I used to feel like it was like a stuck state and you were sort of doomed. And it's a pretty big bummer when you think I didn't have anything to do with creating this, like I was a child, and right. And then to realize that, oh no, like you can actually grow. Our brains are so plastic and our hearts can be open enough to do incredible change. And especially when we tether ourselves to someone else and we do that change together, it can be like a metamorphosis. It can be a massive shift in our dynamic, and just so lovely to think that, you can move into secure attachment and you can earn that, earn that term.
Yeah, for sure. Quite an accomplishment.
Yeah. So if we're in a relationship, people talk about, is your relationship healthy or unhealthy, right? And I think those are interesting concepts to think about a relationship in terms of health. And today we're talking about a relationship in terms of security. So I don't know, like you've mentioned before about Julie Manano, who is a really amazing couples therapist, and she's written a book called Secure Love. And she mentions kind of the differences between the two, between healthy and secure.
Yeah, so she mentions this in her book, Secure Love, that she likes to frame it in terms of what does secure love feel like, opposed to what does healthy love look like. And I thought that was such an interesting thing to differentiate, because I think for the past many years, working with individuals and couples, I often talk about what does a healthy relationship look like? I don't think that's an inherently bad question to ask, but reflecting on it more, what came up for me was, one, if you're asking what something looks like, that's fairly cognitive. It's cerebral. And when we're talking about love and we're talking about attachment, we are not driven by our head. We're often driven by our heart and our emotions and our attachment needs. So it is more of a feels like question that feels more appropriate than what does it look like. And then also health is subjective. And what healthy is subjective. And there's so much that goes into that. That's temperament, personality, that's culture. There's just so many different ways in which you can define a being and a relationship.
Yes.
So I also like that idea of moving out of like this health piece and moving into more of like security.
Yes. Yeah, I think that's really well said. And when we feel secure, I mean, and to me, a synonym for it is safety. I feel safe in a secure relationship. And how do I end up with that sense of safety? So I think that's a lot of that is what we're going to talk about today is how do we foster a secure, loving relationship and the components of that. So trust, right?
Mm-hmm.
So when we trust ourselves, when we trust the other person in our relationship, and when we feel trusted by the other person, that's a huge component of a securely attached, secure in love relationship. When we have confidence, right? So when we feel confident in who we are and in how we feel, in what we need, and when we feel like we can be close to another person and when we want to be close to another person and can figure out how to have connection and maintain the connection and then repair when there's been ruptures in the connection. All of those things are big components of being secure in love. And I think one of the most important things is being able to be connected to self while being connected to another person. So we've talked about lots of nature metaphors before, and everybody knows that I love trees. So it's going to be shocking here to everybody when I use another tree metaphor.
Yay, let's do it.
Let's do it. So if we are in a relationship with another person and we are tethered to ourself as a person as well, so we have a steady sense of self, and I love the word steady for that, then we can think of ourselves as rooted, right? So we're like a tree. We've got really solid roots and we continue because we're always growing, right? If we're a steady individual, part of what makes us steady is how deeply rooted and how thick our roots are. And that's what holds our foundation. And that allows us to keep growing up toward the sun. But then we also can grow out toward all of our fellow trees, right? And we can do that without toppling over. If we've got a nice, steady, strong foundation, right? So if we're deeply rooted and we've got a strong trunk, then we can branch out. But if we use this tree metaphor a little bit further, when we talk about other attachment styles, so we mentioned the avoidant attachment style and the anxious attachment style. So an avoidant attachment style might look a little bit different, right? So might look like a tree that has really shallow roots and instead has a lot of foliage around it, maybe has a nice pretty shrub growing around it. It's very pretty, but it's untethered and unrooted. Right. And that's, we're using that metaphor because when people have an avoidant attachment style, sometimes their fear in connecting with someone else is that I'm going to lose myself.
Yes. So it's not, I just want to make sure I call out that you don't mean shallow in terms of they don't have depth to them as a person. It's in terms of like there's maybe a lack of trust and knowing of self.
Yeah.
And a fear that if they were to connect to someone else, they might lose whatever they do have.
Yes.
So oftentimes someone on the avoidance side is a little bit more like an island. There is a desire to be close, but they kind of distance themselves to feel a sense of safety. That's how they feel safe.
Right.
You distance to put a little bit of a protection, like we said, to have maybe a little circle of shrubs around them. That's the strategy that they unconsciously use to create a sense of safety.
Yeah. And I think this is often the sort of mind-boggling part for people who've been either have an avoidant attachment style or maybe have been in a relationship with someone with avoidant attachment. They want to be connected to other people.
Yes.
So they're driven to connection as well. but there's also a fear of connection that's getting in the way, right? And so there's a great deal of energy put into how do I have relationships? But that's the metaphor of like, we've got all of this foliage and we've got nice shrubs around it and that all looks really good, but not as much tethering to the earth, right? And because of that, feeling a lack of stability, that if I lean too far towards someone else, I might topple over, right? And obviously nobody wants that. So then we have like an anxious attachment style, which again, if we're using our tree metaphor, we might think about it like, you know, the trees that can grow so close to each other that they can actually, like there's a phenomenon where they actually become one tree.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
So they crave closeness and connection above all else. And sometimes anxious attachment is called preoccupied attachment because it is a huge part of what we think about if we have this attachment style. And we are driven to be very, very close, so close that we will become another. Not that that's always what happens, but these are spectrums. So we're talking an extreme version. But again, all of our energy goes toward growing toward the other tree, but again, not growing our roots. So to be in a secure relationship, really the necessity there is to have a rooted self with steady growth for ourselves and steady growth outward toward the other person that we're connecting to. Right?
Yeah. So I think it's important that you've started off with defining theoretically, like, what is this? What is it that we're hypothetically striving for? And now we want to move into, but how do we do this?
Yes.
What are the steps?
Yes. How do we do this? So Becky Kennedy, who is a psychologist, a child psychologist, and has written a really interesting book called Good Inside. She refers to something called multiplicity, which is like the ability to accept two realities at the same time, simultaneously. I think of it almost like dialectics. We talk about the idea that two opposing truths can be true at the same time. But I think with multiplicity, it's that we can have like different realities that are existing at the same time.
They're all valid.
All valid, even if they're different, even if yours is not mine. Right? So it means that both people in any given situation have feelings, thoughts, and needs that are seen, that are valid, that are believed, and that we can empathize with, even and especially during conflict.
When it's hardest.
Yes, when it's hardest. This is essential in engagement with other people. So how do we have a secure relationship? One of the things is the ability to engage in this concept that you have a reality that's different from mine. And it's just as valid as mine. And I believe you. I see you. And the next piece is I want to understand you. Right? So my goal, if I'm trying to have secure connections, my goal is not to be right. I always say, my previous therapist used to say to me, well, you can be right or you can be in a relationship. My goal is not to be right. My goal is not to be convincing or convinced. Right? Because that's not what we're trying to do here. We're trying to connect, which means we have to try to understand. We need to focus on opening, on curiosity, on cultivation of the map of the world that is your world, which is different from my world, right? So one of the best ways to do that is to practice creating my own map for myself. Right? So learn how to understand myself better, learn how to be open and receptive to my own feelings, thoughts, and needs. And the more I practice doing this for myself, the more capable I can be to do this for someone else.
Yeah. Actually, I feel like here I could talk about Gottman's app that he offers, his Love Decks app. And in that app, it's a free app available to anyone really to download. And in it, he has a really cool building love maps exercise.
Mm-hmm.
So just like Amanda mentioned, you could do this work internally, but then with your partner, you can play this kind of game that he has on the app that helps you explore your partner's world
Mm-hmm.
and build that map together, which
Yeah.
can be really fun.
Yeah. I love playing those games.
Mhm.
So I think, in working to understand my world better and your world better, and really holding the reality of multiplicity, which is that both of those can exist at the same time, we want to also then learn how to practice validating what we don't agree with. Because some of the time, what you believe is not going to be the same thing as what I believe. You're going to say, that's not how it happened, or that's not what I said, or that's, this is how I feel. And that's valid, right? That's real. It doesn't mean that I agree with you. It doesn't mean that I'm saying it's okay. I'm saying I want to get you. I want to understand from your lens of your world how this feels, what you need, right?
Yeah, it's really hard to escalate when someone says, I see you. You make sense
Mm-hmm.
to me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's
Right?
right. That's right. If you want to extinguish conflict really quickly, that's the smother.
It is. And that
Right?
really just it really is that element of creating that sense of safety for someone to say, like, yeah, okay, I see that.
Yeah.
Right?
And I think it's true also not just for conflict. It's true for any sort of big feeling. I can think this week alone, I can think of at least twice where my partner's done that for me, where I've had something upsetting going on, and then his reaction is, yeah, I know this is really hard. And it's like
Right.
this.
Mhm.
First of
Yeah.
all, thank you for not arguing with me about my reality. Thank you for not invalidating it. Thank you for not trying to make it smaller than it is. Right? And thank you for staying with me. It seems so simple to send a message like that or to say that to someone. I know this is really hard for you. Right?
Hmm.
But it is so comforting, so connecting, right? To have somebody be able to do that. And that leads us right into this next idea of how do we create this secure relationship. One of the things that I would say is learn to tolerate discomfort. Sitting in someone else's world, sitting in their views, and sitting with them when they're having feelings, especially if it's something like a big feeling or there's a worldview that opposes mine, it can be really uncomfortable. And our inclination is to pull away when what we really need to do is lean into, move toward the other person's experiences, the other person's feelings and ideas. And that can be really challenging. It can be painful, and it is necessary, right? It's necessary to keep weaving connection. It's necessary if it's a genuine connection. And it's necessary to tolerate the discomfort of feelings and views, not just of other people, but for us as well, right? Being able to be connected to ourselves and our feelings, not just someone else's. We can't learn to regulate what we don't tolerate, right? If we have exposure to certain feelings, this gives us space to learn how to regulate them, contain them, right? Embrace them. But if we don't have exposure to feelings, we don't build coping skills for them. Feelings without coping skills lead to behaviors we wish we could take back.
Hmm.
Right? So what I'd say is learn the gaps in your feelings coping kit. Which are the most difficult feelings for you to tolerate? They're likely the ones that you have the fewest strategies with which to deal. They're likely the ones that were less acceptable for you to experience around other people in your home when you were growing up. And they might be the ones that we witnessed other people in our life struggle to put skills to, or watch them completely avoid, dismiss, invalidate, sublimate. Right? And do we have an example of what this looks like?
We do. We do have an example. Yeah. So we were talking about this earlier and I was like, oh, okay. I do have an example here. So, I've shared with Amanda before that one area of discomfort for me, or something that kind of, I guess triggers me, is anger, particularly in men.
Mm-hmm.
And what I will say is that I want to specify this shows up for me in a romantic context, right? So in my friendships, clinically speaking, when I'm at work, this does not trigger me. And I think a lot of folks might relate to this idea that certain things are maybe more touchy or difficult in a romantic setting because it feels riskier, because that's where our attachment wounds can get kind of touched on. So for me, I've noticed that in my relationship, this is something that has surfaced recently in a surprising way. So to give a little bit of background, I've done a ton of work on this on my own, individually. And what it has been brought to my attention recently is that despite the fact that I've done a lot of work on this on my own, and despite the fact that we are in a secure relationship. When we started dating as teenagers, I wouldn't consider that secure, but we've done a lot of work, we've grown together, and now we are in a space where it is secure and it feels safe. And even so, when I perceive just like a whiff of anger, and I really mean a whiff,
A whiff.
I'm uncomfortable. So my partner's displays of anger are very regulated. He's an even-keeled guy. You've met him a bunch of times. He really is like a calm person. He's very emotionally intelligent. So when he does get frustrated or a bit angry, it's really not a big, loud display.
No.
It's never scary. But what I've noticed recently is that unconsciously, if I notice a little bit of frustration or a little bit of anger bubble up, maybe he had a bad day, I will just jump to dismissing it, undermining it, twisting it into something else. So I might say, like, oh, I'm kind of tired. Can we just dial it down a little bit? Or like, oh, but I'm sure it's not that bad. And none of these are conscious. Like, I'm really not trying to sit there and make him feel less than or make him feel unheard. I'm a freaking therapist. So I know what I'm supposed to do. But unconsciously, I've started to realize that I do revert to these places of avoidance and dismissing and so on and so forth. So now that it's come to my attention, either he'll raise that for me, he'll kind of let me know, and he does it in a respectful way. Or what I've started doing is coming back after some reflection and being like, ooh, when you were talking about that thing yesterday and I brushed it off, I realize now I didn't let you feel that. And it's because of my history that I still have some work, I still have some work to do. It's a work in progress. And it's my own discomfort with me displaying anger. And I still have stuff to do there. I know that when I touch anger, I do tend to spiral into shame. And I've worked hard on it. I still go there. And so again, work in progress. So I just felt like, why not just share it? I'm a human and here's my stuff and I do this. And I'm a therapist.
I love that you share it. I love that it's interesting. I think it's so important what you noted, like this shows up in the context of my romantic relationship. It does not show up in other contexts the same way, which must be true because you don't seem to have any trouble with my big feelings.
No,
like that's not, and we've known each other for a long, long time, many, many years. Yep. And you've watched me go through things that would mean that I would be in different feeling states. And one of them would definitely have been anger, not towards you though. I don't think I've ever been mad at you. But I have been angry talking about things, and I've never once felt you go, yeah, but it's not that bad, or any version of that. Never.
No, I don't get activated by that. And I don't get activated by that with clients either. A lot of clients will come in with anger or a bad day, and it doesn't happen like that in my body.
Yeah. And that's so important, I think, because, sometimes we'll have couples come in and they'll be like, I don't know why they're the worst version of themselves in front of me. Well, no, it's that you get to see everything,
Yeah.
right? When it's your intimate partner, you get to see it all, right? And you have a magical wand where you can push on every single historical trauma and trigger that your partner has without even knowing it. It's like magic. And you don't even have to be doing anything wrong because, like you said, like your partner, his anger is relatively mild. And
Yes.
and you have a very secure, safe relationship, and still, because it's an old wound, and that's also what's so important, is that you're recognizing this isn't him, this is my stuff, right?
Yeah.
And I don't hear a hint of shame in your voice as you're saying that. It's an awareness of it. And then it's what's the work that I'm doing here, right? So you've got your own ongoing work of, what do I do here, right? I do a do-over.
Yeah.
Re-invite him to tell me the story again. And if I feel myself getting activated, I might remind myself, like, this is not another time in my life. This is now, I'm safe. This is my partner, not someone else, right? It's okay that there's a big feeling here. Yeah. And I think that it's just so important to like recognize that this is a growth edge for you. That would be, again, my old therapist term, right? This is something for you to recognize, oh, in my coping toolkit, the skills for anger still can get beefier. I can get more skills to put in this box. I can also keep having exposure in my life just in regular ways to anger that's not dangerous anger. Yeah. And that will keep teaching my brain and my heart and my body how to respond to this in a way where I then feel like this is tolerable, this is okay. And I think it also lends us to another thing that we all need to make sure we learn is how to experience my feelings separate from someone else's. So if my partner in front of me is angry, I don't have to take that on as my own feeling. If they're very sad, I don't have to take that on as my own feeling. I can be okay even if my partner's not feeling okay right now. It doesn't mean I'm not moved by their feelings. Doesn't mean I don't empathize. But I am not them. They are not me. Their feelings are their own. And so this is very contrary to like a codependent relationship where I can't be okay if you're not okay. I can't make a choice unless you tell me what the choice is, right? Which can sometimes breed to like lack of limits and boundaries and all sorts of stuff, right? But if I can experience my feelings and expose myself to my own feelings, I can handle being exposed to someone else's and I can tell the difference. Yeah.
Yep.
So, all right, we keep going through these things of how do we create the secure relationship, right? And I think another thing is taking the trust temperature of your relationship. We tend to try to control anything we don't trust, right? So we'll be overly controlling and rigid with ourselves too if we don't trust ourselves, right? So do you trust yourself to have good intentions, to be trying your best even when it falls short? And to have the ability to learn and do better. Do you trust yourself? Do you trust your partner?
I hear a lot of like self-compassion in here, non-judgment in here, right? Thinking about how do you think and talk to yourself and about yourself.
Yes.
Catching that, because often that ends up being projected outward. So if we have the ability to give ourselves grace, to be patient with ourselves, to, have that compassionate lens. Brene Brown talks about it as generous assumptions, taking on the viewpoint, assuming that people are doing the best with what they have. If we can really embody and embrace that, it's easier to extend that to others.
Yeah, assuming that they're doing their best and assuming that people have good intentions, right? That you are good, that I am good. Right? Sometimes good people fall short, but I can trust you a heck of a lot more if I believe that fundamentally you are good. Right? So I think that's another really important piece, which we talked quite a bit about in other episodes, conflict and repair. I think it's important if you want to have secure loving relationships, you must become a reparation wizard.
I like that term. That's great.
So what does that look like? You know, I think when people think of repair, sometimes they think of like, I'm sorry. They think of apologies. Apologies, if we really are quite honest with ourselves, sometimes come from a place of trying to close up what happened and move on rather than repair, which requires an opening. So we'll say like, I'm sorry that that happened. Can we move on?
It can feel like lip service, basically, right? She's like, yeah, cool, we're done. We good?
Right.
Can I leave?
Right. An apology is not in itself a bad thing at all, but it needs to be part of repair. So you can be part of that process. But repair, which is the key to being secure in love, as well as some of the other things we've talked about, is going back to the disconnection, taking responsibility for your part there, validating the impact it had on the other person, on the relationship, on you, right? So it's an opening to return, right? And that's essentially what you described when the times when you have that awakening and you go, oh shoot, he was saying something, he was getting angry. I shut it down, or I sublimated, or I disconnected, and I want to go back and I want to repair that. So you have to actually on purpose revisit, right? Which is the thing that people don't want to do. And you don't just,
sucks.
It sucks. It's
Yeah.
a challenging, uncomfortable process. It can have such a lovely outcome and end up feeling really good.
Yeah.
But the idea of it's like, whoa, right? And you didn't just say, well, honey, I'm sorry I did that. Let's make dinner. Let's move on. You said, I think I did that thing I do with anger. Do you want to tell me the story again? And I'm going to sit right here with it. Right?
Yeah.
And
exactly.
You go ahead and you get angry while you're talking about what happened at work that upset you, or when, so-and-so said something or did something, or you went to the store, and whatever it is, he would talk about, right? And that is so important. So notice we're not saying, Kiara, no longer make mistakes. You should be eliminating conflict in your relationship. We're not saying that. We're saying secure relationships have conflict. Healthy humans make mistakes and take missteps. And you will make mistakes in your behaviors. But punishing someone for drowning when they've never been taught how to swim doesn't make a whole lot of sense. So what you have to do is find the gaps, take some swimming lessons, right?
Yes.
Find the gaps in your coping toolkit and figure out what you need to do to make that a stronger coping kit so you can keep tolerating things that are uncomfortable and you can be that reparation wizard, right? So our next one, I think I have to say, it's got to be one of your most favorite topics.
It is.
Understand what boundaries are.
Yes, boundaries. Oh my gosh. We use this word this is our B word. This is a therapist B word.
It is. And it's often misused.
It is often misused. So I think the boundaries are so important to all relationships. Boundaries are what make relationships strong and healthy and are a key part of making relationships secure and feeling safe.
Yes.
So boundaries keep us connected to ourselves. Boundaries are not just about being in relation to someone else. We need to understand our own boundaries and our limitations. And that's one of the things that keep us deeply rooted, if you're talking about that tree analogy. Boundaries don't require another person to do anything. So we both have been following and listening to Dr. Becky Kennedy a lot. We've referenced her today a couple of times. And this is something that she says is boundaries are something that we're going to do. And when we're asking something of someone else, that's actually a request.
Yeah.
So there's a difference between a request and a boundary. So boundaries are not requests. They're not a preference or a statement. They're definitely not a demand. And they're not meant to be used as a giant fence to keep people out.
Yes. So boundaries don't mean I'm pushing you away, that they're actually so that we can be together, right? They're connecting, they're not disconnecting. But that's like a common misconception that I see with people.
Yeah, exactly. So what are boundaries then? So boundaries are trying to tell someone where our line is and what we're going to do if the line's crossed. It's me telling you what I will do. It's not asking you to do something, right? Boundaries need to be clear. They need to be concise, respectful, and kind. But that doesn't necessarily mean they're going to be nice. There's a difference between kindness and being nice. So it doesn't have to sound sweet, but it still can be said with respect.
Yep.
It's necessary for loving relationships. And it's also not always going to be responded to well. So this is where the dialectical piece kind of comes in, is that they can be loving and they can be kind and they can be respectful. And not everybody's going to like them.
Yep.
And that doesn't mean they're wrong or they're bad.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
We also need to implement boundaries in a way that are age and relationship appropriate. So the boundaries that I'm setting right now with my 3-year-old are very different than the ones that I'm setting with my partner or with a friend or with a client or anybody else in my life. I think that's really important too.
I
right?
agree.
How we say them.
Yeah, I agree. Because again, if we're keeping boundaries respectful, then it's respectful not to have the same boundary for your 12-year-old that you might have for your 3-year-old, right? You're not going to set the same type of expectations or limits necessarily.
Right.
And boundaries can be related to safety and they can be related to our values, right? So that's often what motivates us to implement a boundary, right? Is that there's either a need for it because of our need for safety or because we are preventing a boundary violation, which would be a value crossing for us in something ethical. So if we think of like an example, when we work with couples and we talk about how important it is, if things are getting heated or if they're talking when it's really late at night, that they might take a break, right, from the conversation and come back after they've regulated. So one way that I might state a boundary there is I might say something like, if our discussion is escalating and I'm feeling that either of us are having trouble with containing our emotions, I'm going to step away. I will return once it's safe and it's possible for us to resume a productive connection. Right?
So you did not say, if things escalate, you need to walk away.
Yeah. You need to stop.
You need to stop. Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah. Because that's why people say so often, they're not respecting my boundaries, they're violating my boundaries, but it's because you stated a request. Right? And so, they wouldn't leave. Well, then you didn't state a boundary, right?
Right.
So boundaries have to be that it requires me to do something and you to do nothing, right? And then also, also we need follow through.
Yeah. Oh my
Right?
goodness. Consistency. Right.
Yes. I mean, I think Brené Brown has like a video where she talks about one of her kids when they were really little and they're like eating peas or something and they're throwing them on the floor. Right?
Yeah.
Kids never do that. And, and she says, like, if you do that again, I'm going to have to take away your dinner. And she said, the question is, how many times do I have to not follow through for him to not respect the boundary?
Yes.
It takes just one time.
Yep. Exactly.
And then he knows, she didn't really mean it. Right. So that's the other thing is we need to state it. We need to follow through. We need to be clear. And it can be stated in a way that, resounds with our values and is kind. And we need to accept the dialectics that you might think it's a load of crap. When I tell you, you might not agree with me. You might have big feelings about it. And that's all real, valid.
Yep.
And we're still going to have the boundary.
Yeah.
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 So we've talked about a whole bunch of things that can help with creating a secure relationship, one that feels stable, deeply rooted, where we feel like we can be connected to ourselves and another. And I think it's really important to say here that we're talking about a long-term lens. When we talk about how do we create a secure relationship, like you and your partner have been together for a long time, like 20 years. Is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is the 20th year.
Good heavens.
I feel so old.
And I was just about to say, and you're so young.
Let's maybe both 16 to 36. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, 20 years. And if you have this sort of big picture of your relationship, then you can see that overall it's a stable, secure, loving relationship. Does that mean that you haven't had hiccups, challenging seasons?
Right.
Of course not, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
When we're looking at our relationship and we're looking at improving things, it's like when you look at a painting and you get really close to it and you can see every brushstroke, every imperfection, but you step way back. I was joking with you and saying, my paintings all look good if you step way back.
Right. Your paintings are amazing anyway, but sure, let's go with that.
Thanks. But I have definitely noticed comically that if I like take a picture of one of the paintings I make and I zoom out,
you're like,
so
wow, I'm good.
Wow, I'm good. Right. But the closer
Yeah.
you get, the more you can see like, oh, well, you might have struggled there, Amanda. Yeah.
Right.
And you know what?
Yeah.
That's okay. That's all right.
Yep.
You can see all the brush strokes. You can see the struggles when we go way in. And that's true of any relationship. So when we're talking about overall secure, loving relationships, we're talking about the big lens, the long game, right? The big picture.
Yes. So Julie Manano paints this really beautifully. I guess no pun intended that we're talking about painting. She talks about climate versus weather, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if we think about like the Caribbean, for example, the Caribbean is known to have a sunny, warm climate, but that doesn't mean there's not days of clouds, there's not storms, or even a rainy season,
Mm-hmm.
right? Or hurricane season.
Yes.
So even though it has that, it doesn't change the climate. Same can be said for our relationships. We're going to have challenging seasons. We're going to have stormy days. And that doesn't mean that we say, well, this relationship's crap.
Right. Yeah. This is a
Right?
stormy relationship. No, we had a stormy day. That's weather.
Yeah.
Right. That's different from climate. And also, again, to sort of instill some hope. If you still sort of take the temperature of the climate of your relationship right now, and it doesn't feel like the Caribbean, and that's what you're going for,
Mm-hmm.
you can get there, right? We can do the work. That's part of what we're talking about today. Is these are some of the things that you can work on that might over time change the climate so that you have fewer storms, so that your seasons are calmer and maybe not as fluctuating as Canada's climate.
Yeah.
Not everybody likes that. It's after the first day of spring, I'm looking outside the window and there's snow accumulated on the house next to me.
I know, it's so sad.
I'm trying
It
to
looks like
accept
Christmas.
It does. It looks more like Christmas than it did on Christmas this past year.
Yes.
So when we talk about, this big picture, it's like I was looking up what's the stat that John and Julie Gottman say in terms of bids for connection, because bids for connection are those little like moments where we look for attention and a response from our partner, and that they are really quite predictive of a harmonious, loving relationship long term. This is according to John and Julie Gottman, who do tons and tons of research on this and have been they do nice longitudinal studies, right? So talk about big picture. So I was like, why, gee, I wonder if they have a stat for this. And so they say that if we respond favorably to bids for connection, at least 86% of the time, that seems to be what they found as the magic number for harmonious relationships. And to be clear, we can get up to 100 bids for connection in a 10-minute period because they can be real tiny, right? Mm-hmm. It can just be like, me pointing something out the window, me laughing and you laughing too. It can be
Mm-hmm.
so many little minuscule things. It can be me reaching for your hand. It can be all sorts of things that you then have the opportunity to turn toward, turn away, or turn against. And if
Mm-hmm.
at least 86% of the time you turn toward, then you probably got some Caribbean weather going on, or
Right.
climate going on,
Yeah.
some nice stable overall climate, and that means there's lots of space there in the other 14% for some stormy days, for some days where you're not at your best, for the days where you're hyper aware of the things that you need to grow, right?
Yep. Yep. So we're not striving for perfection
Nope.
in order to achieve a sense of security and safety.
Yes. So thank you for talking this through with me. This was a very interesting look at something that I think we used to always use the term healthy relationships. And I much prefer to think of this as a way to be securely in love
Mm-hmm.
and to be safely tethered to our partner and ourselves at the same time. So want to thank also our listeners. Thank you for sharing your time and your ears and your hearts with us. And remember that there's always hope, right? If you are there alone in the valley, if you're feeling like this is a struggling time for you, if you're trying to figure out how to alter some of the climate in your relationship, or you're looking to get into one that's going to feel like a safer one for you, then you are not alone, and we are right there with you.